I love you. I want to go with you.
She ran like a princess escaping a falling kingdom. Small silk slippers slapping white marble, lace hem dragging, a silver tiara slipping toward eyes that were wide and wet with a terror no child should know. And her shoulder? The delicate lace of her white gown was shredded, revealing a raw, angry bruise where a hand had gripped her too hard just seconds ago, a hand belonging to a woman who was currently adjusting her veil and glowing for the cameras. A child sprinting through a cathedral filled with the absolute apex of soul's hierarchy. She didn't run for the exit. She didn't run for her father, the man standing at the altar in a tuxedo that cost more than a doctor's salary. She ran straight to her, the woman standing by the service entrance, the one nobody in this room had looked at all morning, the one the guests treated like a fixture of the architecture, necessary but invisible, a splash of deep, glittering red against the cold stone of the church. Imani, 31 years old, a sequin red gown that fit her like armor, a face that had long since learned to hide its thoughts behind a mask of professional grace, auburn curls flowing over her shoulders, catching the golden light of the stained glass, eyes that were currently closed in a momentary prayer for the day to end, until the small, desperate weight hit her waist, and the most powerful child in the city just buried her face in a waitress's apron. Nari looked up, her fair skin clashing against Imani's caramel-toned hand, and with the kind of trust that bypasses social rank and bloodline entirely, she whispered, "Please, take me home." Pause for 2 seconds. The cathedral didn't breathe. 300 of the nation's elite sat completely motionless, because what nobody in that church understood yet was why the daughter of a monster ran to help, not the father who could buy the world, or the security team at every door. She ran to the only woman who had ever looked at her and seen a little girl instead of a legacy. Seo-Jin, the groom, stood paralyzed at the altar. His white tuxedo looked like a shroud. His face, usually a fortress of calm, had gone as pale as the lilies lining the pews. He looked at the child, then his eyes moved to the woman in red. He looked at the woman standing 20 feet away, still holding the bridal bouquet she had just used as a weapon. His bride, Jia, immaculate, beautiful. Her expression was currently frozen in a mask of concern that didn't reach her eyes. The cameras were still clicking, capturing the moment the perfection fractured. The temperature inside the cathedral dropped 10 degrees, because Seo-Jin wasn't looking at his daughter's fear. He was looking at the way she held Imani's hand. And for the first time in his life, the man who controlled the city realized he controlled nothing at all. To understand why the most expensive wedding in Korean history died in that moment, you have to go back to a gala hall, a broken tiara, and a secret sanctuary. The memories did not start with the cold air of the church. They started 7 weeks ago in the Sky Towers Gala Hall. That night, the room was a sea of black suits and diamonds. The air smelled like expensive perfume and heavy flowers. Imani was moving through the crowd, carrying a silver tray. She was a shadow in a red dress, dodging the elbows of men who didn't see her. She had gone to the quiet corner of the room to rest her feet. That was when she heard it, a small, shaky breath. It came from under a long table covered in a white cloth that reached the floor. Imani set her tray down. She knelt on the carpet and lifted the edge of the fabric. There, curled into a ball, was Nari. She looked like a lost princess. Her fair skin was pale, and her rosy cheeks were stained with tears. Her expensive white gown was puffed out around her, making her look even smaller. On top of her head, a silver tiara sat crookedly, one of its crystal stars hanging by a thin wire. "It's very crowded out there, isn't it?" Imani said softly. Her voice was like warm honey. Nari flinched, her dark eyes wide. She looked at Imani's caramel-colored skin and the soft waves of her auburn hair. She didn't see the hard face of a bodyguard or the cold eyes of a socialite. She saw someone who looked like a sunset. "My crown broke," Nari whispered. She held up the tiara. "Jia said I was clumsy. She said I don't deserve to wear it if I can't keep it straight." Imani felt a sharp tug in her chest. She knew that look. It was the look of a child trying to be perfect in a world that only cared about mistakes. Imani reached into the hidden pocket of her red gown. She didn't have much, but she always carried a small sewing kit for emergencies. "I have a secret," Imani said. She sat on the floor, ignoring the risk to her dress. Most crowns need a little help to stay strong, even the real ones. With steady, gentle fingers, Imani used a tiny piece of silver wire to fix the crystal star. She didn't just twist it, she reinforced it. While she worked, she pulled out a small piece of dark chocolate wrapped in gold foil, her own treat for the end of a long shift. She slid it toward the little girl. "Magic chocolate helps too," Imani winked. Nari took the chocolate. She ate it slowly, her eyes never leaving Imani's face. For those few minutes, the loud party outside didn't exist. There was no Mafia legacy, no cold father, and no mean stepmother. There was just a woman who treated a broken toy like it was the most important job in the city. When the tiara was fixed, Imani placed it back on Nari's head. She tucked a stray strand of black hair behind the girl's ear. "There, now it's stronger than before. Just like you." Nari didn't go back to her father right away. She reached out and touched Imani's hand. Her small fingers felt the warmth of Imani's skin. In that moment, the bond was sealed. To the rest of the world, Imani was just a waitress. But to Nari, she was the person who fixed things. She was the one who saw her hiding and chose to sit in the dark with her. It was a small act, but in a tower made of glass and ice, it was the only thing that felt real. From that night on, Nari stopped looking for her father's approval. She started looking for the lady in the red dress. Seo-Jin was a man who lived in the shadows of his own power. In the city of Seoul, his name was a whisper that made people look at the floor. He moved through the sky tower like a storm that was always about to break. He wore white suits that never had a wrinkle and black shoes that never collected dust. People did not just respect him. They were afraid to breathe near him. He had spent his whole life building a wall around himself, believing that feelings were just a way for an enemy to hurt you. But lately, something in his cold world had shifted. It was Nari. He sat in his large office, watching his daughter through the glass door. She was sitting on a plush rug, playing with her dolls. For months, Nari had been a quiet, ghost-like child. She usually kept her head down and rarely spoke. But now, she was humming a soft tune. She was laughing at things he couldn't see. Her eyes, once dull and heavy, now looked bright and full of secret energy. Seo-Jin leaned back in his leather chair. He was happy she was smiling, but it bothered him that he didn't know why. He had bought her the most expensive toys. He had hired the best teachers. None of those things had ever made her hum before. He wondered if it was the new wedding plans or the expensive gifts Jia brought over. He wanted to believe he was a reason for her joy, but deep down, he knew he was still a stranger to his own daughter. One afternoon, Seo-Jin walked toward the kitchen area to speak with the building manager. As he rounded the corner, he almost walked into a woman in a red service gown. She was carrying a heavy crate of crystal glasses. He stopped suddenly. The woman stepped back quickly, her head bowed in a polite gesture. She didn't shake or drop the crate, even though most people stumbled when they saw him coming. She stood with a quiet strength, her caramel-colored skin glowing under the hallway lights. Her auburn hair was tied back neatly, but few curls had escaped to frame her face. Seo-Jin looked at her for exactly 2 seconds. To him, she was just another part of the building's machinery. She was the help. She was a person who made sure his water was cold and his floors were clean. He didn't see the kindness in her eyes or the way her hands were steady from years of hard work. He didn't notice that she was the one who had been fixing Nari's toys in the dark. "Watch where you are going," he said. His voice was flat and cold, like a winter wind. "Yes, sir." "My apologies," Imani replied. Her voice was calm and respectful. She didn't look up at him, but she didn't flinch either. Seo-Jin didn't wait for her to move. He walked past her, his white jacket brushing against her red sleeve. He forgot her face the moment he reached the next door. He was a man used to looking at the big picture, the money, the power, and the wedding that would make him the king of the city. He never thought to look at the woman in the red dress who stood in the background. He had no idea that this invisible woman was the only person his daughter truly loved. He was a man living in a shadow, never realizing that the light was standing right behind him. The peace of the sky tower did not last. It ended the moment Jia walked through the front doors. She did not just enter a room. She took it over. Jia was the kind of woman who looked like a doll carved from ice. Her skin was very pale, and her black hair was pulled back, so tight it looked painful. She wore a dress that cost more than a small house, and she moved with a sharp, clicking sound of high heels on marble. To the world, she was a perfect bride for a man like Seo-Jin. But to the people who worked in the tower, she was a storm they had to hide from. Jia did not see people. She saw tools. When she looked at the beautiful art on the walls, she saw money. When she looked at the staff, she saw furniture that could talk. She arrived 2 weeks before the wedding to check on the plans, and the air in the building seemed to turn cold the second she breathed it. Imani was in the main dining room, carefully setting out gold forks for a tasting. She heard the clicking heels before she saw the woman. Jia walked in, eyes scanning the room like a hawk looking for a mouse. She didn't look at the flowers or the view. She walked straight to the table and ran a gloved finger along the wood. "There's a spot," Jia said. She didn't look at Imani. She spoke to the air, expecting the air to fix it. Imani stepped forward. "I will polish it again right away, Miss Jia." Jia finally turned her head. She looked at Imani's red dress, then at her caramel skin, then at her auburn curls. Her eyes were not kind. They were narrow and full of strange heat. It was the look of someone who wanted to find a reason to be angry. "You," Jia said, her voice like a paper cut. "You are the one Nari keeps talking about. The waitress." "I am a server here, yes," Imani replied calmly. She kept her hands behind her back, so Jia wouldn't see them tighten. Jia stepped closer. She smelled like expensive, sharp roses. "I don't like things that are out of place. This wedding must be perfect. That means the staff must be like the walls, unseen and silent. I heard you gave my daughter chocolate. Do not do it again. She has a diet. She has a schedule. She does not need a servant trying to be her friend." Nari was upset. "Miss Jia, I was only trying to." "I did not ask for an explanation," Jia snapped. She held up a hand to stop Imani from speaking. "An oven does not explain why the bread is burnt. It just gets replaced. Do you understand me? You are a service, not a person. If I see you near Nari again, I will make sure you are removed from this building before the sun goes down." Jia turned away as if Imani had disappeared. She began barking orders at the manager about the color of the napkins. Imani stood still, her heart thumping against her ribs. She looked at the gold fork in her hand. It was beautiful and expensive, but it had no feelings. That was how Jia saw her. From the doorway, a small pair of eyes watched the whole thing. Nari was hiding behind a large vase, her little hands shaking. She had seen the way Jia spoke to her friend. She saw the Ice Queen try to freeze the only warmth she had ever known. The conflict had started, and for the first time, Nari felt a spark of anger in her small heart. She knew that Imani wasn't an appliance. She was the person who fixed her crown, and she wasn't going to let Jia break her too. The Sky Tower was a giant house of glass, but had no heart. Every room was designed to show off wealth, but none of them felt like a place where a child could play. However, at the very end of the second-floor hallway, there was a small service alcove. It was where the extra linens were kept and where the staff took their 5-minute breaks. To anyone else, it was just a closet. To Nari, it became a secret sanctuary. Every afternoon, when Jia was busy arguing with wedding planners and Seo-Jin was locked in his office, Nari would slip away. She moved quietly, her small slippers making no sound on the thick carpets. She would find Imani in that tiny room, surrounded by the smell of clean laundry and the soft hum of the building's pipes. In the sanctuary, the rules of the tower did not exist. Nari didn't have to sit up straight or worry about staining her white lace dresses. She would sit on a crate of towels, watching Imani fold napkins into the shape of swans. "Imani," Nari asked one afternoon, her voice small, "will I have to be like Jia when I grow up? She says a princess must be perfect and never speak to people like they matter." Imani stopped folding. She looked at the little girl, whose tiara was once again sitting a bit crookedly on her head. Imani reached out and gently straightened it, but she didn't pull her hand away. She let it rest on Nari's shoulder. "Nari, a dress doesn't make a princess," Imani said. "A dress is just fabric. You could wear a sack of potatoes and still be royalty if your heart is right. Nari tilted her head. But Jia has the best dresses. Everyone bows to her. People bow because they are afraid, not because they love her, Imani explained. She picked up a plain white napkin. Being a princess is about kindness. It's about seeing the person who is invisible and making them feel seen. It's about using your power to protect people, not to make them feel small. That is the true secret of the crown. To prove her point, Imani took a small, silver button that had fallen off a uniform and gave it to Nari. This isn't a diamond, but if you give it to someone who is sad, it's worth more than a mountain of gold. Kindness is the only thing that lasts when the party is over. Nari held the button tightly in her hand. She felt a warmth in her chest that she never felt when she was with the socialites in the ballroom. Imani wasn't just teaching her how to behave. She was teaching her how to be human. In that quiet alcove, Nari learned that the world was more than just money and power. She saw how Imani treated the junior cleaners with respect. She saw how Imani saved a bit of her own lunch to give to the birds on the balcony. Nari began to realize that Imani was the real princess in the tower. These secret afternoons became Nari's armor. While Jia tried to fill her head with pride and coldness, Imani filled her heart with courage and grace. The bond between the waitress in the red dress and the girl in the white lace became a bridge. On one side was a world of ice, and on the other was a small, warm room where a button was a treasure and kindness was the only law. Nari knew the wedding was coming, but she wasn't afraid anymore. She had a secret sanctuary, and she had a friend who saw the real girl under the tiara. The quiet piece of the service alcove was shattered on a Tuesday afternoon. Nari was sitting on her favorite towel crate, showing Imani a small figure she had made out of folded napkins and the silver button. It was a tiny bird, held together by a bit of string. It was the only thing Nari owned that had not come from a famous designer, and she loved it more than the diamond earrings sitting in her velvet jewelry box. "It looks like it's ready to fly," Imani whispered, smiling at the girl. Suddenly, the heavy door swung open with a bang. The light from the hallway poured in, and there stood Jia. Her face was twisted in a way that made her look like a different person. Her eyes were fixed on Nari, then they moved Imani. The silence that followed was heavy and cold. "I gave you a warning," Jia said. Her voice was low and dangerous, like the growl of a trapped animal. Nari jumped off the crate, hiding the napkin bird behind her back. "We were just talking, Jia. Imani was showing me." "I don't care what she was showing you," Jia snapped. She stepped into the small room, her expensive perfume choking the air. She reached out and grabbed Nari's arm, pulling her forward. "You are the daughter of the most powerful man in this city. You do not hide in closets with the servants. You do not play with trash." Jia's eyes spotted the napkin bird in Nari's hand. Before Nari could pull away, Jia snatched it. She looked at the simple white fabric and the cheap silver button with total disgust. "Is this what you've been doing?" Jia laughed, but the sound was mean. "Collecting garbage from a waitress?" "It's not garbage." Nari cried out, her voice high and trembling. "Imani gave it to me. It's a gift." Jia looked at Imani, who was standing perfectly still. Imani's eyes were filled with sadness, but she did not speak. She knew that saying anything would only make things worse for the little girl. "Gifts come from Tiffany's, Nari, not from the laundry room," Jia said. She looked directly at Nari and began to pull the napkin apart. She ripped the fabric into shreds and tossed the silver button onto the floor. Then she stepped on the button with her sharp high heel, crushing it into the hard ground until it was flat and useless. Nari stared at the floor. Something inside her broke along with that button. She looked up at Jia, and for the first time, the Ice Queen didn't just seem scary. She seemed evil. Nari realized that this woman didn't just want to be her mother. She wanted to destroy everything that made Nari feel safe. To Jia, beauty was a weapon, and kindness was a weakness to be crushed under a shoe. "Go to your room," Jia ordered. "And if I find you here again, this waitress will be on the street before dinner. Do you understand?" Nari didn't answer. She looked at Imani one last time. She saw the caramel-colored woman standing tall, even as she was being insulted. Nari turned and ran down the hallway, her tears blurring the expensive art on the walls. She finally knew the truth. The woman her father was marrying was not a princess. She was the enemy, and the war for the Sky Tower had finally begun. The days leading up to the wedding were filled with a heavy, restless energy. Jia was no longer satisfied with just keeping Nari away from the laundry room. She wanted Imani gone forever. She knew that as long as the woman in the red dress was in the tower, she would never have total control over Nari's heart. So she decided to set a trap that no servant could escape. On a Thursday morning, the Sky Tower echoed with a sharp, high-pitched scream. Jia came running out of the master suite, her face pale and her hands trembling. She looked like a woman who had lost everything. "It's gone!" she cried out, making sure her voice reached the hallway where the cleaners were working. "My diamond bracelet, the one Seo-Jin gave me for our engagement. It was right here on the vanity, and now it's gone." Within minutes, the security team was on the floor. Seo-Jin appeared, looking bothered by the noise. He had a mountain of paperwork on his desk, and a meeting with city leaders in an hour. He didn't have time for lost jewelry, but the look on Jia's face forced him to stop. "Are you sure you didn't just misplace it?" Seo-Jin asked, his voice low and tired. "I am positive." Jia snapped, her eyes darting toward Imani, who was polishing the hallway mirrors nearby. The only people in this room today were the service staff. I saw that waitress, Imani, hovering near the door earlier. She was checking the linens again. Seo-Jin looked at Imani. For the first time, he really saw her face. He remembered the quiet woman he had nearly walked into a few weeks ago. He noticed the way she stood, shoulders back, chin up, her auburn hair neatly pinned. She didn't look like a thief. She looked like someone who was being hunted. "I did not enter the bedroom, sir," Imani said. Her voice was steady, even though the security guards were moving closer. "I was in the hallway all morning. Mr. Park can check the cameras." "The cameras in the bedroom were turned off for my privacy while I was dressing," Jia shouted. She stepped toward Seo-Jin and grabbed his arm. "She took it, Seo-Jin. She's jealous of me. She's been trying to turn Nari against me for weeks, and now she's stealing from our family." Seo-Jin felt a strange knot in his stomach. Something felt wrong. He looked at Jia's angry eyes and then at Imani's calm ones. But his phone buzzed in his pocket. It was a message about a multi-million-dollar deal that was falling apart. The Empire was calling him. He didn't have the time to be a judge. "Search the staff lockers," Seo-Jin ordered, turning away. "If it's found, she's fired and handed to the police. If not, we will talk about this later. I have a meeting." He walked away, his white suit disappearing into the elevator. He was too busy to notice the tiny smile that touched Jia's lips for a split second. As the guards led Imani away toward the lockers, Nari watched from behind a heavy curtain. Her heart was racing. She knew Imani didn't take that bracelet. She had seen Jia tuck something shiny into a flower vase in the hallway earlier that morning. Nari realized that her father was too busy building his kingdom to see the truth. If she didn't do something soon, the only person who ever fixed her crown would be gone forever. The sabotage was working and the clock was ticking. The morning of the wedding arrived like a sharp blade of light. The Sky Tower was a hive of frantic activity. Hundreds of white lilies were being carried into cathedral, their smell so thick it felt hard to breathe. Staff members ran back and forth, adjusting chairs and polishing silver. But beneath the beauty, the air felt heavy and cold. It was as if the building itself knew that something terrible was about to happen. Imani was in the dressing room area, making sure the final racks of clothes were ready. She had not been fired yet because the bracelet had not been found in her locker, but she was being watched like a prisoner. Every time she moved, a security guard followed her with his eyes. She felt the weight of the silence around her. The other workers were too afraid to speak to her. Suddenly, the door clicked shut. Jia stepped into the room, looking like a ghost in her long, silk robe. Her hair was already done in a perfect, tight bun, and her makeup was flawless. She walked right up to Imani, stopping so close that Imani could see the hard, flat look in her eyes. "Today is the day," Jia whispered. Her voice was sharp and cold. "By noon, I will be the mistress of this house. And by 1 o'clock, you will be gone. I don't care about the bracelet anymore. I have told Seo-Jin that your presence makes me feel unsafe. A man like him will always choose his wife over Waitress. Imani did not look away. You are marrying a man and a child who both need kindness. Jia, you are bringing nothing but ice into this home. Jia laughed, a short, mean sound. Kindness is for people who can't afford anything else. I am bringing order. And Nari, she will learn to be exactly like me, or she will learn to be nothing at all. She stepped even closer, her voice dropping to a hiss. If you try to speak to her today, if you even look at her, I will tell the police you threatened me. I will destroy your life. Imani, stay in the shadows where you belong. Jia swept out of the room, leaving a trail of cold rose perfume behind. In the next room, Nari sat in front of a mirror while a stylist curled her dark hair. She wore her fluffy white princess gown, and the silver tiara sat on her head. She looked perfect, but her face was full of terror. She had heard every word through the thin wall. Her small hands were clenched into fists, hidden in the folds of her skirt. She realized that the wedding was not just a party. It was a prison door closing. Once the rings were on, Jia would be her mother forever. The woman who crushed buttons and told lies would be in charge of her life. Imani would be thrown out, and the only person who had ever sat in the dark with Nari would be gone. Nari looked at her reflection. She saw the fair skin, the rosy cheeks, and the expensive lace. But she remembered Imani's words. A dress is just fabric. A real princess uses her power to protect people. Nari felt a spark of courage start to burn. She knew she was only 6 years old, and the people in the cathedral were the most powerful in the city. But she also knew she couldn't let Imani disappear. As the bells began to ring in the distance, Nari made a choice. It was her last chance to escape a cold, motherless future. She wasn't going to be a silent doll anymore. She was going to be the girl Imani taught her to be. The cathedral was a cave of cold, white light. The music from a giant organ filled the air, making the floor shake under Nari's small feet. She walked down the long aisle, her white princess dress trailing behind her like a cloud. Every eye in Seoul's high society was on her. Ahead, her father stood at the altar in his white tuxedo. He looked like a statue, handsome and unmoving. Beside him stood Jia, a vision of silk and lace, hiding her sharp heart behind a beautiful veil. Nari reached the front and took her place. The priest began to speak, his voice echoing off the high stone walls. The room was so quiet you could hear a pin drop. Nari looked out at the crowd and saw Imani. She was standing far in the back, near the heavy oak doors. Her red dress was a bright flame in the gray room. Imani's eyes were closed, her face calm and sad. Suddenly, Jia reached down. She pretended to adjust Nari's flowers, but her hand moved like a snake. She grabbed the skin on Nari's arm and gave it a sharp, painful pinch. "Smile, you little brat," Jia whispered, her voice a poisonous hiss under the music. "If you cry, I will make sure that Waitress never finds a job in the city again. This is my day now." The pain was sharp, but the fear was deeper. Nari looked up at her father. Seo-Jin was staring straight ahead, his mind on the empire, his eyes blind to the cruelty happening inches away. Nari looked back at the doors. She saw the red dress. She remembered the secret sanctuary. She remembered the silver button crushed under a heel. Nari broke. She didn't cry out. She didn't stay still. She turned and ran. Her silk slippers slapped against the marble, a frantic sound that cut through the holy music. She ran past the shocked guests. She ran past the flowers. She ran straight for the woman in red. "Nari!" Seo-Jin shouted. The sound of his voice was like a crack of thunder. The groom stood frozen as his daughter flew across the cathedral. He watched in disbelief as the most important child in the city ignored him, ignored the security, and threw herself into the arms of a waitress. Nari buried her face in Imani's red gown, her small body shaking with sobs. "Please," Nari's voice rang out through the silent church. "Don't let her be my mother. Take me home. Imani, please take me home." The room didn't breathe. Seo-Jin walked down the altar steps, his face turning as white as a suit. He reached the back of the church and stopped. He looked at Nari, then he looked up at Imani. Imani opened her eyes. She didn't look down. She didn't look afraid. She held Nari tightly, her caramel-colored arms acting as a shield. She looked Seo-Jin directly in the eyes. In that look, There was no hate, only a deep, tired sadness and a fierce need to protect. Seo-Jin stopped breathing. That look, the way Imani held the child, the way her eyes refused to blink in the face of his power, it was a ghost from his past. It was the exact same look his own mother had given a cruel master years ago. It was a look of someone who had nothing but love, standing up to a man who had everything but a heart. For the first time in his life, the empire disappeared. Seo-Jin didn't see a servant. He saw the truth, and it hit him harder than any enemy ever could. The silence in the cathedral after Nari's plea did not last long. It was broken by Seo-Jin's voice, which was no longer a cold wind, but a roar of truth. He did not look at the guests or the cameras. He looked at Jia, who was standing on the altar steps, her face twisted in a mask of fake shock. He saw the way she looked at Nari, not with love, but with the anger of a person who had lost a prize. He saw the red mark on Nari's arm. In that moment, the wedding was over. The marriage that was supposed to build an empire died before the rings could even leave their velvet box. 3 months later, the Sky Tower felt like a completely different world. The heavy, perfumed air of the wedding had been replaced by the scent of fresh grass and sun-warmed stone. The Ice Queen was gone, her name erased from the building's history. The guards no longer walked like robots, and the staff no longer whispered in fear. The tower was still made of glass and steel, but it finally had a heart beating inside it. It was a late Saturday afternoon in the East Garden. The amber light of the setting sun lay across the flowers like a golden blanket. In the center of the garden, Nari was sitting on a soft blanket spread over the grass. She wasn't wearing a stiff lace gown or a heavy tiara. She wore a simple yellow sundress, and her dark hair was down, blowing freely in the breeze. Beside her sat Imani. She was no longer wearing the red service gown of a waitress. She wore a comfortable linen dress the color of the earth. She was showing Nari how to plant small seeds in a clay pot. Her caramel-colored skin looked warm in the sunlight, and her auburn curls were loose. There were no trays in her hands and no orders to follow. She was just there, her laughter echoing against the tall glass walls of the tower. A few feet away, Seo-Jin watched them. For the first time in his life, the most feared man in Seoul was not sitting at the head of a long marble table. He wasn't in a white suit, and he wasn't looking at a phone. He was sitting right on the grass, his sleeves rolled up and his tie gone. He was watching the 2 women who had done the impossible. They hadn't just saved Nari, they had saved his soul. He looked at Nari, who was laughing as she got a bit of dirt on her nose. Then he looked at Imani. He remembered the night in the gala hall and the crushed silver button. He realized that power wasn't about how many people bowed to you. It was about who chose to stay by your side when the world was cold. "Look, Papa," Nari shouted, holding up the pot. "Imani says if we take care of it, it will grow into something beautiful, just like us." Seo-Jin smiled. It was a real smile, one that reached his eyes and stayed there. He didn't need a strategic marriage or a cold empire to be a king. He had found a new kingdom in the middle of a garden. He had found a home where kindness was the only law and where no one ever had to hide under a table again. As the sun dipped below the city skyline, the 3 of them sat together in the quiet garden. The Mafia boss was gone. In his place was a father who had finally learned how to ask for a seat on the grass. The dragon was no longer guarding the castle from the outside. He was finally living inside it, and for the first time, he wasn't alone.